The opinions expressed in the following programs are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of Rogers nor Rogers TV.
Hi, and welcome to Politically Speaking. I'm David Shearman. My guest is Alex Ruff, who is the MP for Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound. And it's always a pleasure to have Alex. Realize, Alex, that this is almost a tradition. Our first show of the season, and who do we get? Our MP. So that's probably a good way to begin this year.
Well, thanks for having me, David. It's always great to be on and great opportunity to catch up on what's going on in the riding and answer questions that you may have that I know are topical. And it's a great way as we transition and back off the summer recess and back into Parliament.
Well, that being the case, Alex, what did you do this summer? I mean, does the MP just sit on the deck and drink cold drinks?
I wish I did more of that, David, but unfortunately the summer kind of just flashed by. There is personal and family obviously obligations to keep up on with my daughter and stuff, but ultimately lots of events going on now that we're back to normal. Although I will admit it seemed a little bit slower during the weeks this summer compared to last summer, but at the same time, the weekends were absolutely chaotic. Most Saturdays would consist of 5 to 6 different events going on. And whether that's not like right now when we're getting into sort of the fall fair period and they're kicking off in full momentum, or just in general other events, right? And so it was great to recognize a number of very deserving constituents across the riding, whether that's key events that they're celebrating, or whether it's because they're nominated and recognized in some form or fashion, whether through whatever business or industry that they're involved with, or just what they do in the community as a volunteer organization. But then again, I had my second annual constituency barbecue, and this time I was able to use the King's Coronation pins, and we only recognized 20 this time round, but it was an absolute blast to be again able to recognize 20 different than the 70 deserving constituents that got the Queen's Platinum Jubilee coin. So it was a great summer. I'm to my chagrin, it's over pretty much for me. I know we'll get into it later in the show, but I'm actually just on my way to Quebec City for our national party convention. And so it basically does mean my summer's over. I will be back for the final week before we reconvene on the 18th. Back in the riding, I know I got the Tara Fall Fair, and I have some my own party fundraiser to make sure we are ready whenever that next federal election occurs.
Now, just in case people are wondering, we talked about this just before the show. The background you're in is a little different because it's not your old office.
No, I was able to transition there in the spring into a new office. I guess it was really just May that I moved, same building, the Confederate building, or not Confederate, the Confederation building. That was a very inappropriate comment. But the Confederation building, which is one of the older buildings here, it's actually due for renovations, but that won't happen for about another decade, I think. But I was up on the 6th floor, had a great view of West Block looking up the hill, but it was one of the tinier offices. And so when the transition occurred with the new leader, it freed up a bigger office in the same building. So I've now moved to the 2nd floor, but I'm in the same building. So I can host when people come in, whether they're constituents or stakeholders, looking to discuss important issues in current legislation. I now feel like I'm a little bit in a better environment to actually have a bigger dialogue or a more in-depth dialogue and host them properly.
Sure. Well, it's always important when we like to think of our MPs as having local offices, constituency offices, but your work on the Hill is just as important, if not more so sometimes, and it needs that same kind of environment.
No, it is important that we can have those in-depth policy discussions and try to understand the concerns. And it's actually amazing how many constituents find their way to Ottawa at some time. And I'm always more than willing, whether they're just up on a vacation and want a private sort of tour of Parliament, I can definitely try to make that happen if I'm here in Ottawa myself or with my staff. But a lot of people that do represent the riding and the key interests, whether that be agriculture, whether it be nuclear, or whatever it may be that's going on back home, that when they're here, that I can properly meet with them and capture the concerns that they have, so I can best represent that during debate in Parliament.
And I think, how many staff do you have in your Ottawa office?
Just one full-time staff. I'll be looking right now. I guess this is a good plug that if somebody out there has a dependent that's now off to university, that I'm more than willing to take somebody on part-time hours, whatever their schedule allows. That's basically how Hayden, that is my full-timer here in Ottawa, has transitioned. He started working for me when he started first year at Ottawa University, and now he's transitioned to a full-time employment. We'll see what the future holds for him. I know the future's bright. He's a really hardworking, smart, intelligent individual that I know will do well in the future, but I'm very lucky to have him on the team, and grew up on a beef farm just north of Tara, so it's always great to have local representation and local help here. And I'm definitely open to hiring somebody else that on a part-time basis here in Ottawa. But most of my full-time staff are employed back in the constituency because things don't seem to slow down there, especially with some of the challenges with Service Canada, CRA, IRCC immigration. And I think that the proof's in the pudding there when even the current government's now stood up a brand new minister for Service Canada, to try to address the ongoing lack of service that's unfortunately been facing many Canadians as they're trying to access federal programs.
Well, let's just stick on this issue for a minute, the staffing issue, because one of the things that you mentioned is that your current full-time staffer in your office kind of worked their way up. I don't want to use the word apprenticeship, but that's really what it was in a sense. Because this is often, or not an uncommon pattern for young people who may have an interest in political science or history, that they can get some hands-on experience in a place like your office. Because let's face it, you're close to you're on Parliament Hill, but your office is right there in the center of the. I don't want to use the center of the universe, but.
Not at all. Trust me. As a conservative, I think Parliament's as far from the center of the universe as the farther away, the better it is for impacting on people's day-to-day lives. But you're 100% correct, Dave, that it is a unique opportunity for young people to get an employment opportunity and to get exposed to how policy's formed. And in fact, that's what I'm dependent on. You don't have to be lots of experience to help get into the NUG work there and better understand. And in fact, that's, I think, essential. It's one of the things sometimes policy is lacking, is that different perspective and different perception on how policies impact Canadians and impact our youth. So it's something that I treasure and definitely appreciate, having another set of eyes on everything when you're looking at it and try to understand how it impacts all of Canada, but in particular Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound. And that's why I'm always, if I can find somebody that has roots or ties, Brittany could have been on the Hill for a long time and who worked for me for the first 2.5 years here. She had about 10 years on the Hill, but she started out working part-time for Larry Miller when he was the MP over a decade ago, likely closer to 15 years ago. And again, from the riding, her roots, Sauble Beach area, and it was great having her experience at that point, but still very young. She wasn't even 30 yet when I took her on, so she'd been working on the Hill in some capacity. I think she went to university at 16. So there's loads of opportunity there.
Well, that's great, Alex. That's great. Now, I want to just come back to something you said in passing, but I think it's worth noting. You said that you have to keep abreast of the constituency issues ranging from agriculture to nuclear. And dare I say, I think you're the first politician who has put those two together in the same sentence.
I can't I can't attest to that because I'm pretty sure Ben Lobbs has likely done it multiple times as well because he has Bruce Power in his backyard and in his riding, and obviously agriculture is a huge component of Huron Bruce and that riding to just to the south and west of us. So ultimately, I'm sure Ben has used those two words, but I mean, look, they're just two of the big factors. We have hydrogen optimized in Owen Sound that's growing. We have so much small business, and that's growing, and still that we're so dependent upon, and tourism as well. The national parks. There's so much stuff that impacts our riding, and we need to stay. No one person can stay on top of it without a great team, and I'm blessed to have a great team, both back in Owen Sound and in Ottawa.
Well, I'm going to put a plug in here because I'm hoping to interview Ben because we had a little shuffling here at Rogers, and politically speaking is going. I'm not going to say go into syndication because that's not the right word, but I'm doing a politically speaking show for Kincardine, which means I should be talking to Ben on its own under its own separate show. And people, we hope, will be able to watch that on the internet if they don't watch it, if it's not in Kincardine on cable, just as they can watch this show on the internet. So looking forward to meeting Ben and having those conversations. So
I'll mention that you're looking for him, David. I'll mention that to him when I see him tomorrow.
You do that because he'll get emails eventually from our producer, and so that because that's sort of a little bit of expansion that we're all working on here. So that's good stuff. Good stuff. Well, you did more than that this summer. Did I see you on a what is called in the armed forces a ruck march?
Yeah, David, I don't know if that was the smartest thing I've done, but I mean, I joined the Ruck to Remember guys, Lino and Joey. Lino's one of the co-founders, and him and Joey did the whole 920 kilometers from Tobermory to Niagara Falls last year to raise money tied to the Ontario Command of the Royal Canadian Legion to end homelessness for veterans. And so their goal last year was to raise $250,000. They fell a little shy. I think they were just shy of the 200,000 mark, which is pretty impressive. But this year they wanted to get over the total $1 million mark from when Lino had helped co-found this great cause. And so I can safely say that they did actually break the $1 million mark that they've raised to end homelessness and veterans. But what they did this year, instead of marching the whole route, a lot of work done by local veterans in our area. Some of them that I'd served with, or at least had served in my regiment. I found actually and made acquaintances with a bunch of former Royal Canadians or members of the RCR, the Royal Canadian Regiment, that I wasn't even fully aware of that had served in the area. And instead, they put together a number of teams. I think there was 14 of them that did the whole sort of 70 kilometers, but they started at Base Meaford, went to Owen Sound on day one, and then from there went from Owen Sound up to Wyerton on day two, and then on the Sunday morning they had a bit of a physical competition with a number of push-ups, sit-ups, tug-of-war, other games that challenge your ability to work as a team and sort of get things done very fast and in collaboration and cooperation. But I decided to join them on day two for the final 11 kilometers from Hepworth to Wyerton. I think that was smart, only doing the 11 kilometers. My feet survived, but I had steel plates, a flak vest on, or tack vest, and a pack. So I might have even been carrying more weight than the majority of them, but I knew I was only going the 11 kilometers. But I had a couple of hot spots under my feet at the end of it, but I felt it more the next day waking up because I lately had 10 years plus on the majority of those participating age-wise. So, and my warm-up consisted of literally meeting them in Hepworth and having less than 3 minutes to throw the gear on and run after them. We were literally running up the road for a good chunk of that 11K because they were shuffling, but it was great cause, great to see them, and again, so inspiring to have veterans themselves. The majority were veterans. There were some non-veterans out there, but to make a difference in the community, make a difference in the province, and really, I dare say, make a difference across Canada in raising awareness for a very troubling issue, homelessness in our veteran community. But literally putting their feet where their mouth is to raise money, and so glad I was able to do that. And all our local Legion branches across the riding donated as well, and that made a huge difference. So it was a great event. That was only a few weeks ago, and I'm recovered now. Even though I don't like sitting in the truck. I do notice after doing the drive from Tara to Ottawa that I seize up a little bit. So I'm gonna have to figure out maybe get into a more of a stretching regime, because I think as we get older, the body doesn't like the activity or even the cramped in one spot for too long of a time.
Well, it's always good to have the colonel, at least show up for the ruck march. That's good. That's good. Actually, Alex, that is another raises another issue. I just wanted to note that you and I were present at the funeral of Don McIsaac, who is a well-known veteran here in Owen Sound and a longtime member of the Legion. And I think it's worthy of note that there were a number of veterans who were not just doing the veterans tribute, which is something the Legion does, but it was good to see that there were people like yourself present, and a couple of other officers that were present, and it's a very it lives out those famous words, "We will remember them," and it was good to see.
Well, it was great to pay our tribute and respects to Don McIsaac. I didn't know Don well, but I did have the honor of serving with Don's son, Brigadier General retired Dan McIsaac, and so we didn't know each other for likely about my first decade in uniform, but then we did meet just as I was being promoted to Lieutenant Colonel, that I got to know him a lot better. And another, Owen Sound native, grew up in the area, and it was great to see Dan. But his father, Don, had just turned 90 in May before he passed there in the August timeframe. But Don was an active community member. He had impacted so many people through not only the Legion, but the cadet program, Silver Seas. He'd worked a long time in a couple of the industries in the local area, but he was just very active and a very professional, well-regarded, well-respected member of our community. And it's the least I could do, and others, to show up, yourself included, David, to pay tribute to somebody and celebrate a life well lived.
Exactly. And just to take the family thing, and I think it shows the connections in the military. One of his grandsons is at RMC right now, and I had a very interesting conversation with him as well. So you never know. You just never know where things will lead. Well, let's move on. Actually, I want to go back just a little bit to last one of our earlier conversations. You said to people, if you see anything on the shoreline that might have washed up that doesn't look like it belongs, let us know. And this was around the time of the balloon sightings. All quiet on the balloon front?
Yeah, it's been all quiet there on the UAP, the unidentified aerial phenomena, I think is the official term that's being used. So I have not got any updated reports, anything that's been found or reported that was at least publicly made knowledgeable, or even to me personally. Although I would note that just a couple of days ago, I did see in the media that a secret memo had been provided to the Prime Minister that had been redacted through the Access to Information program was sort of made public, and just the fact that memo existed. Right, but no details, and unless there's something urgent there, I can't see myself getting access or seeing anything more on it until something's found. But it is something that I think is going to stay on the radar, because there's lots going on that subject, obviously down in the United States as well, in a more public manner, because I know there's one of their Congress committees is overseeing and has been debating this and discussing it down in the States. So as long as it's going on down there, there will be some definitely overlap, considering the two objects that had been shot down basically over Canadian or in close proximity to our Canadian borders.
For sure, for sure. Well, we shall see. We shall see. Probably, if you're going to look skyward, at least you can always look for the Northern Lights, and then there is the double full moon that happened in the month of August. So there's always something to watch in the sky, and I guess we're also especially blessed to have a fair amount of dark sky. So if you get away from the built up areas, you can really see some spectacular night sightings, if that's your interest. So, well, let's. I was going to say, let's go on. Oh, I know what I wanted to talk about, and that's redistribution. That raised a bit of a ruckus in some parts of the country. I think down the Gaspé there was a bit of a hoo-ha about changing some boundaries, but nothing happened here. Nothing.
No, Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound, our riding boundaries are staying basically, well, they are staying identical. The same thing with Huron-Bruce, and I believe Perth-Wellington stayed the same. Some pretty dramatic changes to Simcoe Grey, just next door to us to the east, because MP Terry Dowell's riding there was one of the largest in Ontario, with, I think, they're sitting with a current population of about 143,000 within his riding. And so they're trying to get everybody down to, I think, the 116 mark or within the proximity. Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound sitting at 113, so we're right there, sort of at within the. They actually allow 25% plus and minus, but their goal this time around was to try to get every riding within 5%. And so they had originally proposed some changes, but after hearing feedback, including from a number of our municipalities that reached out to the commission and provided their feedback, they decided that let's leave the majority of the ridings in our neck of the woods identical. But there are changes coming. Ontario does gain one riding, so there's that new riding that's kind of going in just to the south of Alliston, sort of along Highway 9 is, I believe, where the new riding's sort of being formed, or one of the new ridings. Toronto's actually losing one, so there's a bit of boundaries going on there. And up north, there's some pretty dramatic changes. I know a couple of the MPs up there aren't super happy with the way the boundaries are shifting around in the north. But that's just the way it happens. This happens every 10 years. It's part of a deliberate process that involves a nonpartisan independent commission to work with the Elections Canada and based off the latest census data. So there's changes right across the country in every province, but the key things is Ontario's gaining another seat, British Columbia is gaining another seat, and Alberta's gaining 3. So when we return, whenever the next election occurs, sort of after, I think, June of 2024. So if we have another election before next June, then the ridings will be identical for the following parliament. However, if the election's called after sort of June of 2024, it'll be under new boundaries, which won't affect us in Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound, but in the end, we'll go from 338 MPs in the House of Commons up to 343. So it'll be some changes there.
For sure. I did notice that your party leaders, your former party leader's riding of Durham got chopped up. I used to live in that riding 20 odd years ago, and it was quite interesting to see that they basically chopped the bottom off the riding below the Oak Ridges Moraine, I guess would be a good way of describing it, but then took the riding all the way across. It used to go about halfway across to Lake Simcoe, but now it goes all the way across. It's a huge riding. I mean, it wasn't small in the first place, but it's you've got a big riding, and we've got a big riding here, but that's a sizable riding. Sizable.
I actually think geographically it gets a little bit smaller, although Scott Davidson, who's right now is York Simcoe, he's taken on a good chunk of that sort of the northwest portion of what was the riding of Durham, or what still is the riding of Durham. And I know some of the other then is going a bit to the east then. So you're right, it's just the population's been growing as the Greater Toronto Area continues to expand, and it normally expands right pretty close to the 401. So obviously Durham's population and growing, and they decided to change and keep the sort of, carve out almost more of the rural area, which has its pluses and minuses for obviously everything, because sometimes it does change the dynamic of who the people are within that riding, or makes it sort of more uniform in some senses too, which is easier for an MP in some ways when they only have to sort of focus on a few key issues. But at the same time, I think there's lots of value to having MPs that have a bit of exposure to everything, because then it does cause an MP to look at that piece of legislation that's being debated from all angles and all sort of perspectives, which I think does lend itself to better policy and better legislation for all Canadians and not just certain demographics.
Yeah, it's very easy to get caught up in a bit of an echo chamber as an MP, isn't it? That it doesn't matter where you are, you listen to the people maybe who agree with you, or without. I'm not speaking of you specifically, but it's maybe a little harder to hear other voices sometimes.
Well, or just understanding the different perspective if you haven't lived it, and you're not facing that same feedback within your riding sometimes. So. But trust me, I'm pretty sure I'm safe in stating that every MP in the House of Commons gets both positive and negative or constructive criticisms, maybe the better word, that we all get it on a daily basis. And in fact, I would argue that we get more constructive criticism daily than we do positive feedback, because people are reaching out, expressing their frustrations, either with whether it's the current government, or whether it's the job you're doing as a representative, or certain policies or lack thereof on certain issues. So look, you do get the feedback, but what I'm just saying, when you're hearing it from and you're looking at, because you're having to look in depth on these different issues of why a policy is coming out a certain way that it is, it's because that problem that we may face in our riding is even exponentially larger in other parts of the country, or in more urban settings, as somebody that represents merely a rural riding. And I know housing's a great example of that. The housing solutions in Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound, and it is a huge issue here for attainable and affordable housing, won't necessarily work the same, or what we need to solve the problem isn't the same that necessarily a major urban center it would be proposing. And another great example is childcare, right? Is the program that's been sort of put in place, and the agreements that's been signed by the federal government with the provinces, pushing this $10 a day daycare. A great program from an intent perspective. However, it's not universal. It doesn't exist everywhere yet, because the spaces don't exist. And even if the spaces exist, the staff don't exist. And right now, what we're seeing across the country, both even in our major urban centers like Ottawa, for example, or back in the riding, is I've heard this directly from parents and from daycares, is there's robbing Peter to pay Paul, in that in order to fill the demand now for the $10 a day full daycare program for preschool age kids, they're taking ECEs out of the pre and after care. So if your kids are young, you may have a cheap solution. If your kids are now in school age and you did have a program, you're out of luck, because there's a lot of programs being canceled because they just don't exist. And unfortunately, I don't know too many adults that have the flexibility to work a day that starts at sort of 8:30, 8:45, and ends at 3:30 in the afternoon, right? So it's a huge challenge out there. But my whole point in the tangent I went down was to address that what may work in those major urban centers, because they're dense and you can get to different solutions, don't work when you're living out in, if there's even the spots that say exist in Owen Sound, but you're living in in Tara, for example, how, if your kids are in school in Tara, how do they get to that daycare spot that may be available and there may be staff that's in downtown Owen Sound? Somebody's still got to get them. There's not like school buses. The kids can't just hop on local public transit to get to that daycare. So the point is we have to have flexible solutions in all policies that come out across the country. And I think that's just the importance of having a diversity of opinion and different lenses to look at our problems as we try to analyze and come up with the best legislation possible.
And on that, Alex, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be back because, no, I got more questions. Friends, I'm David Shearman. This is Politically Speaking, and we will be right back.
This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
This is Rogers TV.
My Uncle Cheney was one of over 150,000 Indigenous children that were taken to residential schools between the 1800s and 1996. My uncle ran away from school wanting to get home to his mom and dad, and sadly he didn't make it and died of exposure. When Gord Downey found out about my late Uncle Cheney's story, he wrote Secret Path, a series of poems that became an album, then a graphic novel, a documentary, and a concert. Gord met my family, and together we formed the Gord Downey and Cheney Winjack Fund. Together, we are sharing Secret Path and other reconciliation resources with legacy schools, setting up legacy spaces across Canada, and hosting events like Secret Path Week to inspire all Canadians to engage in reconciliation. Before he left us, Gord asked us all to do something.
You're gonna figure it out.
Will you join us? Together, we can make Canada a better place.
Hi, and welcome back to Politically Speaking. I'm David Shearman. My guest is Alex Ruff, MP for Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound. And it's always a pleasure to have Alex on the show to talk about what's happening in Ottawa and what's happening in Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound. Alex, welcome back.
Great to be back.
Now, you said earlier you were on your way to Quebec City for the policy convention, the party's policy convention. And that's 2 days starting the 7th and going through until the 9th. What do you do at a policy convention?
Well, so before we get that, it's actually 3 days for all of us that are elected because we actually have a national caucus meeting starting tomorrow morning. So a chance for us to get together, discuss key issues, discuss sort of strategy going into the fall as well. But then every 2 years, and I can't speak for the other national parties, but I know our party, every 2 years, we have a policy convention where we debate and discuss new policies and changes to our constitution that have come from the grassroots, that have come from our electoral district associations and the membership of the party from right across. So that's a process that started actually back in February or before, when each individual riding association was able to put forth ideas, and they need to get I think 10, I can't remember how many co-sponsors. They got to get enough sort of support to make it through to the first stage. I know our local riding helped support, I think 3 or 4. I think we co-sponsored 3 or 4 of the policies. A few of them I know have sort of made the next stage because then they all get voted on by all 338 riding associations. And then the top, I think, could vary from 30 to 60. I think it depends. And I don't have it right in front of me, the sort of the rules, but we basically take that sort of the top tranche of policies that were supported right across the country. And then those are the ones that get debated, and then out of them, they sort of got to make it out of a plenary sessions that will happen over the 2 days. to actually get voted on the floor, which is a bit of a change. This is the first policy convention that I've got to go to since elected. Actually, the first one I've ever been to, other than the one we did 2 years ago was done virtually. And so it was done a little bit differently because we actually debated every single thing, in a relatively public forum. So whereas this, it's a bit more sort of, I don't want to say behind closed doors, but more in breakout sessions and smaller groups, so that everybody, it's only those top sort of policies and constitutional changes that will then get debated and actually voted on for potential adoption by our party. And so we'll see what happens there. So I still have about 110 pages of reading to do to go through all the individual policies. Some I'm fairly familiar with. Some are pretty straightforward. Some of it's just sort of an update that happens because things have changed over 2 years and they're no longer relevant policies potentially because there was some stuff I know even in the last one that specifically referred to COVID things, and some of that is obviously amended and changed. So we just need to take a look, study that, and hopefully come up with some good changes that will resonate with Canadians right across the country and right across the political spectrum, and they will help form the foundational basis for the party going on. And some of those policies have existed since the party came into existence over 20 some years ago, or about 20 years ago now. And so we'll just keep moving ahead. And it'll, again, provide that foundation for the platform that I know we've already started working on, not knowing when the next election is going to be, but I know the team and some of my colleagues have been asked to be sort of that lead in policy development for the platform. And so I know we're working on that keenly. So it's the ups and downs of a minority government is that the next election could be any time, although based on polling data for this summer, I have a feeling the Liberals government's not real keen to call an election anytime soon.
Yes, it's interesting. I actually read the release on the policies that are being voted on. It was actually published in Hill Times this morning, and it's actually quite interesting. I mean, if you're a policy wonk, you're in hog heaven, but at the same time, it does show the direction the party is looking at, because it's, as you said, from the ground up, and it's I didn't see any great surprises. But at the same time, okay, there's a whole section on constitution and governance for the party, which, okay, that's your business. Bit of a snore fest. But some of the other stuff, climate change, taxation, this, that, and the other thing. Yeah, it was interesting stuff, because it does give you a sense of where the party is and what the party members are thinking. So from that aspect, it's really quite good stuff. Problem is that the Hill Times doesn't have a great circulation other than in Ottawa. But boy, does they ever keep you informed of that kind of stuff of what's going on. The other thing that I noted in that is that you're going to have as a keynoter one of the founders of the party, Peter MacKay. And I thought to myself, that's different. But then I realized, yeah, he is a founder of the party. He was the one who brought the two, the Reform Party and the conservative and progressive conservatives together. So kind of interesting to have that both historical context as well as the forward-looking aspect to the policy and, of course, the next election. So should be interesting.
It should definitely be interesting. I think Mr. MacKay may take issue with you referring to him as historical. He's not that old. He's just in his early 50s, I think. All
right, he's younger than both of us, all right?
Oh, he's not younger than me. I'm only 49, David. Come on. And I just may look more seasoned, I guess you could say. The life experiences have been tough on the body. But ultimately, it's important because, again, the Conservative Party, I've said this countless times publicly, in my viewpoint, we're really the only big tent party left at the federal level. So we do represent a wide diversity of opinion, and it's why we support We recognize and respect the differences of opinions, but that comes from all venues and sort of aspects of our party and our membership. And the other challenge for all the national parties is just Canada's a big country. There's a lot of challenges that face British Columbia, that face Ontario, that face Alberta, that face the north and or Atlantic provinces that are fundamentally different, right? So it's tough to get to kind of come together and come to a consensus sometimes, and that's the importance of getting together and listening, because ultimately that's what we need to do is listen to each other and then come up with sort of those policies that we were talking about earlier. It's important to have policies that work for everybody and not just certain parts of the country.
The other comment I thought about the policy convention that is really interesting, and it was made by a political scientist, is he pointed out that the reason for the policy convention is not just policy. It's you've got a new leader. It's an opportunity for a new leader to meet the troops and to the troops to get to know the new leader, and for Mr. Poilievre to put his own stamp on the party going forward, because he has. We all know him from his presentations in the House, and he's certainly got a very active social media presence. But this allows the party, the members of the party, the rank and file, to get to know this person a little better, and that's not a bad thing either, because after all, whenever the next election is called, he's at the front, but these folks are going to have his back.
No, you're 100% right there. It's important for the leadership of the party to be front and center, and an opportunity for the grassroots membership to get out there and meet him. I would argue that his cross-country tour and his constant travel all summer, but even during the leadership race, gave a lot of Canadians an opportunity to get to know him a bit better. But we're a huge country. We're now over 40 million, and so it's to get out there, every opportunity to have more people to get to know him and help share the message of hope that he's trying to get out there and of necessary change, I think is important. So ultimately, all of these events, they all matter.
Sure. Right down to ditching the glasses. Sorry, I can't ditch my glasses. I'd be as blind as a bat. But anyway, that was one of those small points, I'm sure. But let's go a little further into the fall, because the House starts to sit at the end of the month. I don't know the exact date, but
18th September.
Okay, so it's mid-month.
Yep.
And what can we expect in this particular session of the House?
Well, that's really up to the Liberal government. They control the legislative agenda. I know there's been a few bills that have been sitting on the back burner. I even just replied to one the other day that I can't remember the specific issue. I had to go digging for it, but it was something like, why hasn't anything happened on this bill, was the question to me. And it's like, well, the Liberals tabled it, but they haven't even brought it up for debate. They put it on the table. They sort of signaled this was something important last December. It never got debated once from January to June. So ultimately, the government, that's the privilege of being in government. The Liberals get to decide what we debate. There are some exceptions, right? We do get opposition days where we can bring motions forward to debate things. And we do have the procedure, our what's called private members business. And I'm maybe up, maybe not. I'm getting really close where I am on the order of precedence, because any MP can technically table any bill. Some of the parties, the NDP, are really good at this at the start of every parliament. They'll table 30 bills that outside the order of precedence that will never get debated because they just signal that, oh, this is important. And then they wonder why nothing happens on it, or Canadians wonder it's because you don't have that right. You do have a right to debate and put forward an idea. I have a couple ideas, but I've got one bill ready to go. It's just actually, even today, we just finalized our sort of internal party process to get the necessary support to make sure it was good to go. But just in case I'm up the first week back, right now I'm on the outside looking in. I'm the next person, and therefore I might not actually get up till February during the next what's called replenishment. I do have a bill to remove the GST off the carbon tax, because it's feedback I've been receiving not only across the riding, but I've heard across Canada, is Canadians don't understand why they get taxed on a tax. So I've drafted it's a fairly simple bill. It's only 1 page long, and it will remove, if it's successful, the GST off the carbon tax. So we'll see how that goes. I'm going to table it regardless. I just might not get a chance to move it until I'm up in the order of precedence. So that's something I should actually be tabling day one on the 18th. Sorry, I got to put it on motion. So it needs to be put on motion on the Monday, and then I need to be ready to potentially table it on the Wednesday. So I plan on doing that all the first week. And then whether it actually gets moved or not will depend on if I'm actually up or if I have some more time, because there is another policy, or it might not be a change to actually a bill. It could be a change to the Parliament of Canada Act, or it could be done through a motion because it changed to standing orders. But I'm really keen on sort of making changes to the security clearances and the way some of our committees sit. I find governments of multiple political stripes over the over the last 20 years sometimes use the excuse of classified information to avoid public scrutiny and accountability and transparency, even within Parliament. So I'm actually trying to push to get a number of our committees, the Public Safety Committee in the House, the Foreign Affairs Committee, and the National Defense Committee to all have security clearances for the permanent members of those committees. And that way, if something comes up, the government can't hide behind, or if they do try to hide behind it, it'll be very apparent to the Canadian public when the excuse they've had, well, you're not cleared to see it. Well, if all the members of those respective committees have a secret security clearance, well, then it would allow for a more, it still won't be public, but it'll allow those Canadians and those parliamentarians that have been elected by the Canadian population to better represent them and to have some semblance of accountability and transparency, because now you have all parties that sit on those committees with the opportunity to actually look at it. So the challenge is it's a little bit more complicated because the House of Commons is sort of the masters of their own destiny. And so it's hard to come up with a piece of legislative changes that won't sort of tie parliaments and MPs' hands, but it's done in a proper way that allows that flexibility. So that's why I'm saying it may have to be a change of to the standing orders, which then MPs have to vote on anyway. So we'll see how it all plays out. But right now I do have a bill ready to go that I intend to table that's going to get rid of the GST off the carbon tax, which I know will help try to make life more affordable. Because right now I think it's about, it's 14 cents plus a liter on the carbon tax. The carbon tax is impacting Canadians when they're filling up at the pumps, at least in the province of Ontario. And so 3% of that may not seem like a lot, but if you're filling up, and you're driving for a living, you have to commute long distances in Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound, that 30 cents or 50 cents or $1, depending on what you're driving, will add up when you're doing that multiple times a year. And if it's a way to help Canadians, I think I can, it's the right thing to do.
Sure. Going back to the clearances issue, I know that Elizabeth May ran into this very issue because she does have top secret clearance, or yes, clearance, and around the foreign interference file. She was given access to reports, and she made quite the statement that it's all redacted.
Well, no, she didn't make the statement that it was redacted, but she was based on a suggestion when David Johnston, the former Governor General, and that was the so-called independent special rapporteur on the foreign interference. He had made in his report a recommendation that the party leaders be given access to the same documents that he had. So in order to do that, for Elizabeth May, she had to go get a security clearance. I don't know if they got full top secret or just secret. I wasn't privy to exactly what level that they were given, but her complaint publicly was she was given the summary of the documents, not the actual documents themselves. So it wasn't that they were redacted. She was just never given access to them when she made that public statement. But there's a lot of confusion around out there because even the government, the ministers, don't actually have security clearances. By virtue of becoming cabinet ministers and being sworn into Privy Council, they take an oath that has a lot of the same implications, but they don't actually go through a security clearance. So Mr. Polyev could be given the same access. He doesn't need a security clearance. He could just be read in. He's a former Privy Councillor. He just needs to go through sort of the reading in process. But I actually think that there's value to actually having more members of Parliament having to go through the security clearance process that myself and the other members of the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, so myself and a number of the senators and the other MPs that sit on that committee, we all had to go through it, and it's something that I've had pretty much I've had a security clearance at some level my whole military career. So really the last 30 years, out of the 20, I'd say almost 20 of the last 30, I've been cleared to the top secret level. But that doesn't mean you get to see things. Just because you have a top secret security clearance doesn't mean you get access to it, because it's very much a need to know. But when you do need to know, I don't want the government, regardless of their political stripe, using the excuse that the members can't see it because they're not properly cleared. So I just think it's important, again, to do our jobs, to be accountable and transparent to the Canadian population.
Well, it's certainly, it will be an ongoing issue, and that will be something for us to watch, Alex, as this session proceeds. I'm sure in our next conversation you'll give us an update as to whether you were successful or not. By the way, I came to realize as you were talking, the reason the NDP introduces all those private members' bills is that they can say with evidence, we raised it in the House. Okay. There are a lot of things in the House that get raised, including drinking water glasses. So
very true, David, very true.
So who knows? Anyway, before we go, and we've got a little bit of time yet, I wanted to touch on the status of C-21, which is a bill we've talked about before, the government firearms legislation. It has moved through the House. It was passed at the close of the last session, I believe, and before the House adjourned for the summer, but it's now in the Senate. So, okay, the Senate is the chamber of sober second thought. How much sober second thought are they going to take?
Well, I hope they take forever on it, just because I'm not a fan of the bill in the first place. I don't think it actually does anything to address gun violence in Canada. It doesn't do anything to actually make Canadians safer. It's not a public safety bill. It's a bill focused on the wrong demographic. It's targeting law-abiding firearms owners and not criminals. So as for how long the Senate takes, well, that's really up to the senators. I mean, the challenge the government has is that they don't have government senators. They have one sort of senator that represents the government in the Senate, Mark Gold. But other than that, they're all so-called independents, with the exception of I think we're down to 15 conservative senators. And so out of the 100 plus, so those 15 can only do so much when they don't like something. They're only 15 votes out of over 100. So ultimately, how long it takes, how much evidence they want to hear, I'm sure there'll be lots of stakeholders, law-abiding firearms owners that will be interested in testifying to the senators and getting their viewpoint again on the record for the senators to make their decisions on whether or not that bill will ever pass or not pass. The same thing goes with a number of bills that still need to get through, in some cases, Parliament, some that have even hit royal assent. The other bill that I heard lots about this summer and that we've seen firsthand the impact of is Bill C-18, which has royal assent, but it hasn't been enacted yet, and the impact that's had when you have Meta, through whether it's Facebook or Instagram and Google, but with Facebook and Meta having basically banned the sharing of news information on their site under the so-called threat that, well, it was going to, because of revenue. Well, they don't seem to be concerned about any revenue that it was bringing in them, because to be frank, I've heard from independent media in our own backyard, whether it be over in Meaford all the way over to Saugeen Shores kind of deal, where they're disappointed with this bill and with the decision that Meta's made. So I think they're both equally frustrated at both the Liberal government and Meta. but at the same time, they understand what Meta's done because they utilize social media, Facebook in particular, to get a lot better coverage of their local news and local news across Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound, and it didn't cost them anything. So they actually viewed it as free advertising at the local regional media level, more so than with the way the government's doing, and with the big players that have raised the ruckus and sort of have been pushing this because of potential ad revenue. So I think that bill, or the discussion around it's not over yet. So we'll see what happens in the fall on legislation that's even still currently ongoing, but the actual whether or not there can be a hold up to enact it or not.
Yeah, and I think that you make a valid point that the Senate is the Senate, and it has its own processes. I remember many years ago spending breakfast on the train with a senator in New Brunswick. He was having breakfast, and I sat down at his table when I got on the train, and we had a wonderful conversation for a couple of hours. And the point he made was that the Senate is both sober second thought, but has its own ways of doing things. And we kind of write senators off as sort of old fuddy-duddies, but I think we're past that. Most of our senators are thoughtful people. That they're people, most, because there's always exceptions, are people who are interested in Canadians. And, it will be interesting to see how these bills will play out. The Meta bill, if you want to call it that, plus C-21 and others. So I think we're already setting the agenda for our next conversation.
I think there will be plenty of changes before we talk again, David. I guarantee there will be surprises. That's the beauty and the challenges of involved in politics, is that ultimately you can't foresee or forecast everything that's going to happen. And so I know, but I'm pretty confident in saying that we will be talking about affordability challenges in housing and other key issues, and unfortunately some very negative ones too. The challenges around the opioid crisis and others that there is no silver bullets to. There's lots that needs to be done at all levels of government, and I think that more needs to be done, and I'll continue to push for more to be done in these important issues that impact Canadians, impact the great constituents of Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound.
I heard someone say that we don't have a silver bullet, but we need a silver shotgun for the opioid crisis.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. And on that, Alex, we're out of time, and I want to thank you for being with us today to talk about the upcoming session in the House. And I'm sure that the policy convention will be in the news, so that's something else to watch for. Have an enjoyable time there. Friends, I'm David Shearman. My guest today has been Alex Ruff, MP for Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound. It's always good to have you with us, and yes, we will talk again.
Call the Rogers TV viewer response line, email us, or connect with us on social media.
Here's what's coming up on the next edition of Grey County Life.
We'll check in with Pat Scott from Big Brothers Big Sisters Grey Bruce to talk about their upcoming Golf for Kids' Sake golf tournament.
We'll also be joined by Renee Robbins from the Owen Sound Animal Shelter to meet another animal looking for a forever home.
Today, I helped a senior find transportation to an important medical appointment.
Today, I helped a new mom find virtual programming so she didn't feel so isolated.
Today, I